Well, hello out there. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Annette Richmond. This is the Smarter Career Moves LinkedIn live show, and I'm so excited to have you, Marion, as my guest today. We were chatting a little bit before we went live. We met about a year ago on Clubhouse. We just happened to be in one of the same rooms together, and your just thoughtful comments and how generous you were and are with your knowledge just made me like you instantly, of course. And I'm so excited that you said yes and chose this topic for us today. And so, for people who don't know you, can you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, it was a very kind intro, Annette, and the feeling's mutual. I appreciate what you share with your knowledge with those who need to hear it. Yeah, my name is Marion Spears Karr. I'm a 32-year veteran in the executive search business, particularly in healthcare and life sciences. I'm a native of North Carolina. I live in the mountains of Georgia. My I run an executive search practice called Comhar Partners. We work with healthcare organizations literally all over the world finding appropriate leadership. But I'm a real student of behavioral psychology and leadership thought and career development. So a lot of different pieces going on, but that's me.
Well, again, I am excited, and I'm not really familiar with the you know career, the flow concept. And I did a little research ahead of time. So I know a little bit, but very, very little. And as I mentioned to you, I'm always excited to get a new perspective. So can you first explain a little bit about what flow concept is?
Absolutely, and I'm probably one of the only people that have connected flow theory or flow concepts to the job search perspective. But just a little backstory, real quickly. I became really interested in flow theory several years ago when I realized that I grew up not obviously in the Carolinas, but I've spent most of my life outside of recruiting in the extreme sports world, and I've always been interested in optimal performance and being in the zone or being in the moment. And many people that know me think I was addicted to adrenaline, and in fact, it was the hyper focus that I was really, really driven by, not adrenaline. Like I don't jump out of airplanes or climb mountains or anything like that. So I didn't have any interest in the adrenaline part necessarily. It was kind of a side piece. But I became interested in flow theory when someone introduced the concept. So flow theory was created by a gentleman named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who just passed away, unfortunately, in October this last year. Mihai, I call him Dr. C, was a real founder of the positive psychology movement. And his whole focus, really, in his research was around happiness and what makes us happy and how we fully engage. And a flow experience is one that everyone has flow moments. They just don't have a label for it. But a flow experience really kind of has a bunch of different components I'll be real brief about. But a flow experience is one where you're fully immersed in the activity. You're like all in, like every synapses is firing on that particular experience. It requires activity. It's not just, you can have a flow experience where you're being passive, but really you're fully engaged. The second piece is you lose a temporal time, understanding of time. Imagine that, think about a time where you were really involved with something. You were so into it that, oh my gosh, 3 hours went by and you didn't even know where the time went. That probably was a flow experience. Another aspect of flow is that we feel some command and control of the skills that we own in the context of the challenge. So we have some command and control of the situation. There's feedback, and then when the flow experience is over, there is an intrinsic experience or an intrinsic value gained from it. For example, some people get into flow experience when they're in a competition mode, right, where the competition is really strong and they're battling it out with the person that they're competing with, or the team they're competing with. And even if they lose ultimately the game or the event or whatever, the race or whatever it might be, they still have this sense of self-worth that comes from it. So that's a flow experience, and you can learn more about studying flow, but that's flow experience. In a minute, we'll talk about how can we apply that to the job search or evaluating a role.
No, that's very interesting, and I feel that I'm familiar with that. And as you mentioned it, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that feeling, where I get that sometimes if I'm working on something, if I'm writing particularly, and I'm really getting into sort of the zone.
Yes.
And the time goes by, and the next thing you know, it's 3 or 4 hours later. So, I get what you're saying. So I want to just say hello to Matt, who has joined us from North Carolina, and
Hey,
also
Matt. Good to see
to
you.
Nazmul. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who is also joining us. Um, so so how does this whole idea translate to career opportunities? So while I think I understand the whole idea of flow, I don't make the connection to evaluating career opportunities.
Yeah, no, that's a reach. And Nazmul mentioned that my sound wasn't too clear. Nazmul, give us a thumbs up if I sound a little clearer now. I made an adjustment to my microphone. So yeah, it does seem as somewhat of a stretch or a leap, but let's look at the flow experience for a moment in the context of when are we not in flow. So um, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi theory around flow is that we're only in those experiences when the skills that we own align with the challenge that we're in.
Okay.
When we're not in that situation, let's say we own a set of skills that are not being used, are not being utilized to the fullest. In other words, the challenge is not as strong. We can be in a state of apathy or boredom. And I see this a lot with careerists in that when they are trying to think about the work that they want to do, they want to work in a fulfilling environment. They want to work in an environment where their skills are being challenged and used to the maximum. But they don't want to be in a situation necessarily where maybe the challenge is not as strong or the role is not as strong for them. And that's where a boredom comes into play. Also, there are many times we take on a job that doesn't use the skills that we like to use the most. There's another theory around called relationship awareness theory that talks about this idea of we own a set of skills that we like to use the most that speak to who we are from a core value perspective. And there's when we're not in that situation, the gentleman who created that, by the way, is a guy named Elias Porter. Dr. Porter says that we are in a state of conflict. This is how I connected flow to the job perspective because I'm a student of Porter as well. So if you think about roles that you've had to play, and we have all had jobs that were boring to us, right, or not as fulfilling. Those are the jobs where oftentimes we have own a set of skills that are not being utilized. The other side of the coin, and then I'll stop and pause for a moment, is when we're put in a situation where the job or the challenges of the job completely tax us. We don't necessarily own or have a command of the skills or the resources or the experience needed in order to achieve that. In other words, the challenge is much greater. Csikszentmihalyi calls that a state of anxiety or a state of angst. And so think about those two perspectives. When are we in a state of angst or anxiety in a job? And when are we in a state of boredom or apathy? In both cases, performance drops, right? And so as we think about evaluating new jobs, we want to first have an understanding of the skills that really matter to us. that we
Hmm.
feel like we get the most from, and then start looking at the role from that perspective. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's a little bit of backstory on it.
No, it does make sense to me, and I think one thing is, there's a couple of things that come to mind for me. One is that when you're thinking about the skills and the things you enjoy, when you do, let's say I like to take pictures. Let's say that's something that I enjoy.
Mhm.
Now, if I do that, I'm doing that as my job, then it becomes work, and that takes on, it takes on a different perspective, because when it's work, it's different from when it's your hobby. So I think that people often, think about, oh, I love to do this, so I'd like to do that for my job. But then I'm also thinking, and I'm curious what you think about that, but also when I was working as a magazine writer, I'm assuming that it's good to have kind of a mix of things that you really love, that are challenging, and things that are not. And I know that from, getting my dream job, which was working for a magazine, writing for a magazine, it was wonderful. When I got my first byline, it was so exciting. But part of my job was, when we got products in for photo shoots, was typing up labels to send the
Mhm.
products back to the manufacturers. So
Yes.
there are those boring parts to every job, but it sounds like maybe those are necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I changed my microphone. Do I sound better now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Nazmul, thank you for the heads up. I actually, the microphone setting had flipped. So, yeah, there are going to be times when we have uh, a situation where we're going to have to take on tasks that are boring or are repetitive, or maybe not within the skill set. But if we think about a job, say I'm looking at a new career opportunity, one of the things we want to do is balance how much of that role is going to be in that category as opposed to those skills that we really prefer to use. So,
Mhm,
one of the exercises I teach people is to first, before you look at a job description or look at a particular position, is create a list of your own capabilities that you place the most value in. Which are the ones that give you the most satisfaction? Which, like, from a photography perspective, is it the composition of the photo? Is it finding the location where you want to take those shots? Is it the different skills that you need to make that photo perfectly? Whatever the different things, there's all these different nuances of things within the photography role that we might play. But when we look at a role, we want to make sure we understand those capabilities. And then here's where the evaluation tool comes into play. This is where you can use it as an evaluation tool. Look at the job description, look at the role that the company says they're trying to achieve. If the majority of the role is focused on using those skills that you find boring, or that you
mhm.
don't find aligned with who you are or want to be. This goes back to Porter's theory around being in conflict. When we're forced to use skills over an extended period of time that are not the ones that we prefer or really enjoy, we automatically become in some form of conflict. So it's that first step is really evaluating the different skills that we own in alignment with the job. So just real quickly, and I'll stop and let you ask a question. I'm very detail oriented. I can be extremely detail oriented, but it's a trait that I've had to learn to be successful. It's not one I enjoy,
Mhm.
right? It's not, I really don't enjoy it. But I know it's a skill that I have to use. If I were looking at a new job or a new career move that was going to require me to be detail oriented 70 or 80 or even 60% of the time, I would have to take a pause in the evaluation of that. Even though I know I could do it,
Mhm.
is the trade off, well, are there other things about that role, like the pay or the location or the company,
Mhm.
that would balance that? That's where the evaluation comes into play.
So, that also makes me think of evaluating, not when you're going in for the interview, evaluating the culture. And what I mean in this sense about culture is, when I worked for the magazine, it was very fast paced. It was go, go, go. We were working on, maybe sometimes 2 issues at the same time. And it was, exhilarating. Sometimes it was taxing, but I enjoyed it. And then after I got my master's in psych, I ended up working in a nonprofit. And it was a very different vibe. It was very much, there's nothing that can't be done tomorrow. Now, that made me insane because I like that fast pace. And, I also, my personality is, if I take on a new job and I'm working with a company, whatever, on a volunteer board, I'm thinking of how can things be better. But some companies love that. They embrace it. And other companies, I worked for one, had very much of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. So, so how does that all work into it? And how do you know?
Yeah, that's $100,000 question or a $200,000 question or $500,000 question. That is a really difficult question. One of the things you can do, and I recommend this to my candidates that I work with or people that I know that are looking, is to reach out to people that already are in the company. The networking is not. It's hard. We know, Annette, you and I are networkers. We're great networkers. It's part of what we've created, that as part of our role in creating our business. It's not natural for everyone, right? Networking is not it. But it is amazing how much people will share information. So, the company may say they're fast paced, but that's point of relativity. Like for fast paced for you might be like, go, 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 go every day, go, go, go. And where there's a KPI to be met every day, there's something to be measured. But their idea of fast paced might be, we work really hard on Mondays. You know what I mean? Like it's all point of reference. It's all point of reference. So one of the things that you have to be prepared for is to think about asking questions either during the interview process or through networking around, what does that really mean? What does fast paced mean? And why is that important? Why this is where we have to become students of not only of ourselves, but of the companies that we're hoping to go to work for, the role that we want to play. Yeah. That's where the research takes place. So I think, how can you find out? Network and ask a lot of questions and be prepared to ask those questions.
Yeah. And as you're talking about being a network, I don't know that I'm a natural networker, but I think of it, I don't think of it as something transactional. And I find that people who tell me that they don't like networking, I have friends looking for jobs like, I have to be networking again. And they think of it as something that's very transactional. I'm out of work. I need something. I'm going to meet people. But, I think of it, and I think that I would imagine you think of it as well, is it's just meeting other people. It's just meeting new people and building those relationships. And, if I'm looking for a new vet, we have 2 dogs. If I'm looking for a new vet, I'm going to ask people I know first. And that's networking. But people they don't think of it that way. They think of it solely, in this sort of business transactional thing. And it requires a change of mindset. And one of the things, and I wanted to ask you about this because with this concept we're talking about and your experience as a recruiter, I think sometimes the challenges people have is their inability to sort of shift their mindset into something else. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about that.
I think, there's a lot been talked about and written about, mindset shifting or reframing how you see yourself. And matter of fact, I'm working on something similar. I'm working on a book about something similar to that. I think there's 3 things that we have to think about is, what is our objective? What is our driver? What are we really trying to accomplish? I mean, if it might be, we may be unemployed. Well, the motivation to find a job is driven by, economics and all the different things around being unemployed. But what are other motivations? If we're unemployed, do we, one of the things we need to look at is we need to decide what's important to us right now, as opposed to 6 months from now, as a year from now, et cetera. We may have to take a job that we don't want now to get the next level. So what is our, what is our need? What was our objective? The second thing that we have to think about is, what are the things, even no matter what the job is or the role is or whatever, is what are the things that are going to make me successful? In other words, what do I bring to the table that make me successful? And we need to be aware of that. And what we might find is that, talking about mind shift change, is there may be things that make us successful in one part of our life that we don't even apply to our work. That could be, if applied, could make us even better worker. And the third thing is that we have to decide, no matter how much pain there is, we have to be intentional every day to realize every day we got to go and see if we can learn, if we're going to improve today. Right. And we can have a day off, we can have a bad day, or we get whatever. But if we make the decision that we need to make a shift, if we've said, oh my gosh, I'm so unhappy, or whatever it might be, then being intentional about what are we going to do about it. Like just sending resumes out and connecting with recruiters that's hoping. That's just hope.
Yeah.
It's got to be more than that. I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, it does. I know so many people, they go into something, their career, the job search, without much thought behind it. Just, okay, I'm not happy here, I'm going to start looking for a job. And their ideas, they get their resume ready. Maybe they do a little work on their LinkedIn profile, but maybe not. And they sit at their computer and apply to jobs on job boards. And they may apply to 50 jobs, and they, at the end of the day, they feel like they've really accomplished something. And as we know, they really have not. It is the whole idea of being intentional. But I'd like to ask you about, when talking about the idea of being intentional, and it sounds like you want to have steps and you want to have a plan behind this. But what about the whole sort of gut feeling that you get about things? I know the two worst jobs I ever had were both positions where I saw red flags. What I wanted, one was I wanted to get into advertising, and the other one was something else. And I took the job anyway. The advertising job, I was 6 weeks later, I quit. I mean, and so, should you trust your gut? What kind of part does that play in all of this?
Yeah, that's a loaded question in some ways, because some people's gut, they ignore it. They ignore it. So when I say it's a loaded question, it's because I make a lot of my decisions based on my gut. Like literally, it's part of being intuitive, I guess. I don't know. And I've made a lot of mistakes. So yes, here's the thing about red flags. If there are red flags, if something makes you think, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right, there's probably something behind that. And that's where, talking about being intentional, that's where we've got to go, wait a minute, I really do need this job. I really want this job. I really like all the trappings of the company. I like what they've said. I like their benefits plan, or I like the money. But I probably need to make sure that red flag that just popped in my head isn't valid or not, or is valid. I love the fact that you shared that you took a job and then like 6 months later, you're like, oh my gosh, this is terrible, I got to go. I don't know if we've all done that, but I've done it, and in previous careers, and in side jobs, and even in taking on projects. There was a project not too long ago that was completely aside from the work that I do, but it was a project at first I was super interested, and it was going to be pretty, lucrative to do it. And it was a side situation I could do easily, I felt like. But the red flags just kind of started popping up. But I kept looking at the dollar going, that looks pretty good, and well, okay, not that many hours. And finally I came to the conclusion, you know what, it's not going to be worth that, and I had to decide, no, I'm not part of that project. That's hard when you're, as we all always say, it's hard to push away the unhealthy food when we're hungry.
Even when we're not, for me.
Even when we're not hungry, right? But when we're really hungry and you go to the cupboard and the only thing in the cupboard is something really unhealthy, and wow, you're going to feel terrible tomorrow, but you're hungry, that it's very difficult. So that's where let's tie it back to flow experience. That's where, when we take a moment when we're not starving, to think about the things that are valuable to us and to think about the things that matter to us in those situations, then that gives us a point of reference so that our gut, if you will, is more true. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It does make sense. And the whole idea of being intentional, I've been doing that for the last, since towards the beginning of this year, definitely in the second quarter, where I started really evaluating how I was spending my time and things that I was doing. And there were things that I had committed to that were not moving my business forward the way I wanted. And I realized that I could be more productive. And so I had to set those aside, even though, I enjoyed it. I was doing something with friends. It really wasn't working for me. And even things like watching the news, I quit watching the news in the morning, and not because I'm not interested in the news, because I'm a bit of a news junkie, but I found that hour or so that I was having my coffee, if I'm reading something that's, moving me forward, changing my mindset, whatever, it's much better and more productive for me. So but it's not easy to so can you just give us a couple of tips if on being intentional? I mean, how do you, if you're not normally that way? I mean, I have,
I'm not.
syndrome,
Yeah, this is not like some easy thing for me. No. So there were two things that we did. One, just to your point about watching the news, about 7 years ago, we made the decision as a family to remove the TVs from our home.
Wow.
And we have, now the boys who are our family, they're young adults and get ready to launch. But they have a TV or whatever, but most of the stuff they watch is Netflix, whatever. But literally in the main parts of the room, we have no televisions. And we gather, we get our, obviously we go on the internet a lot, but read Wall Street Journal, or we read online, or read the industry knowledge, industry pieces. So one of the things you have to decide about being intentional is what are the distractions to keep you from being intentional. And you gotta make hard decisions. You gotta move them out. You gotta remove them. And TV was one for me. That was one, just an example. The second thing about being intentional is you can't just I'm going to live my life intentionally. I'm going to make it. That's bull crap. That's not true. You just, oh, wait a minute, there's a deer in my yard. I'm looking at the deer. I'm not being intentional. I'm just seeing a deer. It's beautiful. But, but what you have to do is practice it incrementally. So for me, I used my sports as well to think about, when are the times when I'm fully immersed in what I'm doing? When am I fully engaged? What distractions do I clear out to keep me focused? The price in the stuff that I do is if I do lose my focus, then I'm going to pay for it and probably in pain, in my sports. So again, and you don't have to put yourself to that situation, but so my point about being intentional is you just have to practice it. Say, it doesn't have to be, I'm going to live my life like this all the time. It's, we give yourself experiences where you're being that way. The
Mm-hmm.
third part, and I'm not, I read a lot. I read a pretty good bit. I'm not the most prolific reader that some people are. I don't read like 30 business books a year or 40 business books a year, but I read a lot. One of the books that I read that really changed how I looked at this type of focus is Greg McKeown's book called Essentialism. That book, I want to be really careful here because there's only one book that's really changed my life, but that book had a real big impact on how I saw work and how I saw where I was spending time on things that were not really essential. So that was really helpful. So I don't know. Again, all my answers seem to be long answers to short questions. So
no, that's fabulous. That's why I invited you on to share. So, I'm interested to hear what you think. And I just I just jotted down the book because I'm, as I'm eliminating some things, I am incorporating others. And I hear what you're saying. I think it's like people go to the gym and they say, okay, it's, first of the year, or it's right before, bathing suit season. I'm going to go to the gym, and I'm at the gym every single day. And that lasts for like a month. And so, you have to put little things like, one change maybe at a time.
Yeah. Exactly. I think God bless people that can do it, but I think New Year's resolutions are horrible.
Yeah.
Like I just think they're horrible goal. They're hoping, and don't get me wrong. There's some people that do that. So basically when talking about being more micro focused is to think about what's something that if I were really intentional today could really make an impact on me or financially or my work or my family or whatever, as opposed to it always being this long game. Dory Clark's got a book out called Long Game, which is amazing, by the way. Again, not a book hawker, but Dory Clark's book, The Long Game, is one where she talks about some of the things we do today may not seem to be like get us anywhere, when in fact may teach us something or give us an experience that's better down the road. Mm-hmm. So for people who are not like, well, how do I be intentional? Pick one thing that you need to be intentional about, and practice that. And I'll give you my example. I even though I've been an athlete my whole life, almost, I've always been an athlete that if you met me, you would look at me and go, wow, you're like 30 pounds overweight. You don't look like an athlete. You don't look like what you say you do. And I've always struggled with that. When I was at my peak, when I was really in the professional ranks, obviously was not that way, but as an amateur and as an adult, one of the things that I had to get a handle on was my diet, and not dieting, but just eating better. And someone recommended intermittent fasting. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I don't know, let me try it. And then I had to be really intentional, and I ended up getting an app that tracks my fasting. It's made a huge difference. I've lost weight. I've had mental clarity. Matter of fact, had I known about intermittent fasting, I made good grades in school. I'm going to brag a minute. I did make good grades in school. But had I known about intermittent fasting, I would have made even better grades. Mm-hmm. The ketones that release from fasting allows you to focus in a way that you can't otherwise. Now, for some people with blood sugar issues or whatever, they might not be able to do it. But I'm using it as an example. Mm-hmm. That being intentional about my fasting is stuff that now I've learned. Okay, if I can do that, then I can be intentional about something else. Like today, I'm going to make X number of phone calls, marketing calls, or I'm going to hit a particular level of performance today. And so you learn intentionality in one space, or being in flow in one space, and then you apply it to another.
Okay. So I do want to ask you to just share a little bit about your show that you do. And I'm sorry, I don't know how often you do it, but your show is healthcare thought leadership. And so what was kind of the impetus for you to start that show? And
Great, great. Thank you, Annette. And thanks for the opportunity. So, Healthcare Thought Leadership is my Friday at 12:30 show where I interview people in my network and share their amazing concepts with my network and beyond. That's the whole idea. Sharing my network with my network and beyond is the catchphrase. I started it specifically because I joined a new company, Comhar Partners. Comhar Partners is an international executive search firm, but it was not particularly well known within the healthcare world. I've been well known in the healthcare space. So I started it to kind of create some branding around Comhar Partners. But what is evolved into in that is I bring on, in the same format that you are right here, I bring on people who have a particular area of interest in my world, either healthcare or life sciences or biopharma or whatever it might be. And we talk about what problem they're solving. Basically, the model is to talk about a problem that they're solving. And it's been really successful. I'm taking a little bit of a break through July and going to restart in August, but I've got my multiple guests already lined up. But it is an interactive show. And then I have another show that spun out of that called Healthcare Thought Leadership Experience, which I and that's on Wednesday nights, every other Wednesday, and it'll start back in August. And my co-host is Samana Jetty. I think you know Samana. And it's same topics, healthcare, leadership specific, not always healthcare, but it's leadership centered, but it's highly interactive. We invite a lot of people to participate in the comments, and we talk about a topic. So those are the two shows that I do.
Yeah, no, that is interesting. And I know with a lot of these shows, most of the people that watch this show watch it on the replay, or if they are in job search mode, they're not, they're not active in the comments because people kind of want to keep that to themselves.
Yeah.
So you didn't gave me also how you choose your guests. So you're always looking for someone who's got something innovative, I'm assuming, to share.
Yeah, innovative, or they have a depth of background about a particular problem in their space that's unique. For example, one of my guests not too long ago was a guy named John Sims, who is at Safer Texas, which works with hospitals on infection prevention and patient safety. And we took on the Redonda Vault case, the situation at Vanderbilt, where a nurse was convicted of criminal negligence in the death of a patient because they administered the wrong medication. And that was a tough topic to talk about. But we talked about not about that specific situation, but what is the culture in an organization that would allow for something like that to happen, and how can we as an industry fix that? Because that's a really interesting case, because she reported her mistake, but the mistake was seen as so egregious that it became a criminal investigation. and so there's this concern that nurses might not come forward. Again, we don't always take on topics like that. Another topic that we took on was not too long ago was a company called Fluid IQ that's created a really interesting device that improves the ability to resuscitate someone. And it's a very simple 3D printed device.
Wow.
But it's making a huge difference already in the ability to resuscitate someone. A lot of patients that go into cardiac arrest or stop breathing, the damage, granted, we want to save them. We want for them to be alive, right? We want to resuscitate them. But oftentimes the damage that are done by the traditional bagging, air bagging, and volume of air is very damaging to the lungs. And they have, even though they live, which is great, they have this horrible experience afterwards. Well, Fluid IQ's created a device to kind of eliminate that situation. So it was good to have her on one of the presidents, the president of the company on the. It's good to have her on the show to talk about this amazing innovation.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. It sounds fascinating. I try to catch. There's so many interesting LinkedIn lives. I try to catch them.
There's a lot. Yeah,
I end up watching a lot of them on the replay. So I do want to. Someone made a comment. Now I am not familiar with this, but I'm assuming that you are. What does this word? What does this mean? And what can you speak to this?
Yeah, I saw that. No, I can't actually. I was going to look it up. Mark, and by the way, the gentleman who posted that, Dr. Mark Schnitzer, is a brilliant physician leader, and quality leader. He's actually been on my show, but so I looked it up, and the word ennui is a feeling of listlessness and dissatisfaction rising from a lack of occupation or excitement. So if we go back to the flow experience, and Mark, by the way, absolutely on point word. I didn't know the word either. Ennui is really in alignment with the thing we were talking about. When we're in a state of boredom or state of apathy in our job, we feel listless. We feel there's dissatisfaction. We're not being taxed to use the skills that matter most to us. There are times we have to do that, but if it lasts over a long period of time, we that state of boredom or that state of apathy ends up becoming a performance issue.
Yes.
When somebody gets fired or laid off, not fired for cause, my first question to them is, when were you bored, or when were you in a state of conflict? I want to know. And almost to a person, they will tell you about an experience or multiple experiences of where they were bored or apathetic or disengaged for the mission or disengaged, that often will tie right back to the performance issue.
Yeah.
That's why we have to be very aware. That's when we start to feel ennui. If I'm pronouncing it correctly, we need to be aware of that. So, Dr. Schnitzer, I think that's an on point word. I'm going to use it now. I didn't know.
Me too. I consider myself to be a bit of a wordsmith, but I hadn't heard of it either. And here he is explaining it, giving us an example. He succumbed to ennui and despair. So thank you for teaching us today. I appreciate it. I know Mary does as well. So as we're kind of getting near the end here, I'd like to ask you two questions.
Sure.
One, what's something about you that would surprise people?
Oh, wow. I don't. So for a lot of different reasons, but one, I like to challenge myself. Two, it's research for me. I've taken on a lot of hobby jobs over the years, what I call hobby jobs. Some I needed them to survive. Some I needed them, when we were in the middle of after 9/11. I started my company, my first real company after being with the firm that I was with for 10 years, right before 9/11 hit. And when 9/11 hit, obviously the industry crashed, and Carol was an entrepreneur starting a company. So to answer your question, I've taken on a lot of different hobby jobs. I've one of my jobs that I've done and gotten paid for was stand-up comedy. I took a comedy class to try to be a better public speaker, and end up working part-time in the as a paid MC, an opener for a comedy chain in North Carolina and around the region. So that's probably not many people know that I do stand-up comedy. Yeah.
Well, I love that, and I'll tell you, although I'm surprised, I'm not shocked by that. So so that's very cool. Now, my second question for you is, we've been talking a lot about, kind of we've rambled around a bit. Is there anything that you would like to share that you think is important that I haven't brought up and we haven't discussed?
No, I think I just need to reiterate one thing for anyone that's out there in the marketplace, either be it they're in their current employment, they're not signing to leave, but they like to grow, or they're going to be in a job search, or they're in a job search, is to first take an assessment of your value and really understand that you've got a lot of accomplishments that you've already put in the bag. Some of them may be great. Some of them may be, in terms of measurement, some of them might be small, but all of those accomplishments add up to make you who you are. And I think oftentimes people are like, oh my God, I got to write a resume. Where do I start? I tell them, don't start with the resume. Start with a list of accomplishments. What have you done? What have you achieved? Forget the resume for a moment. And you need it. Obviously, you're going to need it. And then I know you work with people on it. But first, take an assessment of the lions and bears you've already killed. To use the David and Goliath analogy, David had a real sense of his own value. I'm not being religious here. Let's just use the story as a contextual story. Nobody else saw David as a warrior, but David did. Like, he doesn't call himself an underdog. And he knew he had a set of skills he was going to apply to different contexts. So the one thing to your audience is that I would want them to think about is you own a set of skills and accomplishments that already make you valuable. Take assessment, take the time of that. It's not being overly proud. It's not having hubris. It's not, being arrogant. We need to assess the value that we bring. And then the follow up to that is then build your next steps based on how do you build on that. That's what I'd want to share.
No, I love that. It is so absolutely true, because it's the things that you have done that separate you from someone in a similar position at a similar
Exactly.
company. And so, I want to thank you again. The time has just flown by, and it's been
You're welcome.
such a pleasure. Thank you to everyone who's been here with us during this time. I will be back next week. And for now, I will say goodbye. And thanks again, Marion, for being with me today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Have a great day.